Hello everybody, thanks for coming back to the channel. A little update to my BetaFPV 75X. This little monster, the canopy and the camera mount inside. Many of you may have heard about this just the other day when I had that video that was kind of a hodgepodge of my recommendations for parts and quads to look at purchasing if you're in the buying mood, if you have funds burning a hole in your pocket. And I put that clear canopy on just so we could make it simple to look at. It is printed in TPU. And of course the famous blue that we've come to love here. And that inside is the Caddx EOS2 camera. Charger's always interrupting me. But it allows you to get all sorts of camera angle. Like the angle I have it at here is just replicating what we have in the previous mount that we had in the Beta 75X. You can go up more than this. You just need to carve out more of your canopy up here. And as you can see, it's got two screws in the side. My understanding is the EOS1, I think it was like a second production run possibly, or later on in the production runs, they also have screws in them. But be careful, you know, be sure that if you're buying an EOS1 that it shows that it's got those screw holes, or you can verify it in some other manner, because it may show up with a solid body, so you can't mount it in this if you have plans to change out your camera. The nice thing about this camera is it has wide dynamic range, so you get a lot less blowout from sunlight through windows, from lights in your house, from the sun outside. And it just makes flying conditions better overall, especially if you have one of those days where the sky is just overcast, but yet it's daytime. I don't know how to describe that very well. It's just the sky is gray. It makes that stock camera really wash out when you get pointed towards the sky. It has a really hard time. And then when you're pointed back down towards the ground, it suffers as well. But as you can see, this does adjust, and I haven't even tightened this down all the way. It moves quite freely, about as far as my little wires here in the back will allow it. I can actually go below. You see the lip going down below the canopy there a little bit, but it moves up and down just fine. You can screw it down tighter, and I think that's going to be the tough thing about this modification, is sourcing screws. By the way, Robert Thompson, if you didn't hear in the previous video, he designed this. He does not have a Beta 75X, so he was exorbitantly patient with me and making different suggestions and trying to make this fit. There is a shelf inside. My printer doesn't do a very good job of printing it, but it is a thin print of a shelf right down in here, to where the VTX can sit up in there, just like in the previous mount. As you see there's the shelf for the VTX and the previous, or the stock mount. I don't even think they're printing it out of this material anymore, because my Beta 65X is made out of something much more flexible than this. It doesn't look nearly as smooth, so I don't know what this material is, but I don't think they're using it anymore. You have a little bit of a support structure here to make sure we don't get too wide. I don't even think that's necessary because of the screws, so if you cut that out, that'll be just fine. We went through a number of iterations, and my printer is not great, so don't judge Robert's design by my printer. My printer does a fine job, but it doesn't do a great job. And Robert, he's a printing guru. He has been trying to help me, but with my limited time, making changes and showing him pictures of my printer hasn't gone real fast because of me. So hopefully we can get my printer one day all tuned up and printing well. But this does add weight. The stock mount weighs 1 gram. The new mount weighs 0.81 grams. The stock camera weighs almost 1.5 grams. And the Caddx EOS weighs 3.45 grams. But I think the modification's well worth it. To have an adjustable camera, especially if you're someone who's maybe flying this diversely, in other words, indoors and outdoors, and maybe you just want to use the camera angle to naturally slow you down. This does not bring the hoop in view until you get the camera angle all the way down as far as I can get it. And then you get just a touch of these hoops in your FPV view. So unfortunately we don't, or at least unfortunately for me, you don't get much of that hoop in view. I also stole a little tip from NJ Tech and used a zip tie to keep my antenna down, because I did notice, like he did, that it was getting over here. I didn't think it was hitting, but you know, just a little extra security or peace of mind. As you're watching some of these short snippets of flight footage, pay a special attention to where you see brightness and light, you know, especially in the indoor and when you're flying towards the sun. I do try to show that fairly well to give you a better idea of your flying experience. And you can go back to my previous video, which I'll link down in the section down below, to where you can see this flying outside, and you can see how the stock camera handles light, which isn't great. As long as you're keeping it mainly down, it does fine, but once it's mainly looking towards the sky or towards the bright lights, it really starts to wash out and have a difficult time. And then the adjustment between bright and dark, it isn't very good with the stock camera. I think it works a lot better indoors than it does outdoors, but I do think a lot of people are flying these things outdoors. Now, you may have just heard this the other day, but also I think it's a good idea to tip our designers. When you go to Thingiverse and you download, you get that little splash screen, and down in the lower left it says tip the designer. You know, create an account, you know, throw them 50 cents, a dollar, whatever you think. You know, you're getting an STL file that you can print time and time again that's going to actually save you money in the long term. I think if you buy a mount that doesn't even fit the Caddx camera from BetaFPV, it's like $4 or $7. So, and that one's could break again, and then you have to go buy another one. So I think it's a good idea to help keep that printing community designing stuff, and it also lets them know that you appreciate it. Not just, you know, clicking the heart or them seeing their download count, or, you know, click them, what is it, the I made one or something like that. Those things help them know how popular their prints are, but it doesn't necessarily reward them for the hard work. And as I said in that previous video, this was iteration 13. Can you imagine that? I mean, to me, when he put the version on there in the STL file when I downloaded it, I was like, 13? We've been through that many versions? It was ridiculous. And you'll notice the images on the download link for the camera mount that has, you know, the Nick Burns blue here. But so tip your designers if you would, you know, even 50 cents, 25 cents, whatever. These things are wildly popular. A lot of people are getting them. I think a good number of people are also going to want to put better cameras in them. That's kind of what we do in this hobby, is we get something we really like and we try to make it better. We're always tinkering, changing, doing things of that nature. And I think it's a good idea to tip them. So I'm not a designer, so I have no dog in that fight, so to speak, outside of my work that I've done with Robert. But designers, I think, are working very hard to make these things work right. And I got a little first-hand experience working with Robert and knowing how much time, effort, and expertise goes into creating a mount that does work well. If I didn't mention it earlier in the video, sourcing screws for these is going to be a bit of a challenge, so hopefully you have a large screw kit. You do need to keep the head as relatively flat. The screws that I'm using are actually tapered, so they're not button head and they're not hex head. You can use those. You may find that they kind of bow your canopy out a little bit, or you may need to poke a hole in the side of the canopy. You might also be asking yourself, how did I make this hole bigger? I went through a few iterations, so you can use a soldering iron. You can heat this up. But unfortunately, this is kind of the result, so you kind of have to clean things up afterwards with a small pair of scissors or something, so you can just use this. Maybe I had it too hot, or maybe I didn't have it hot enough, but this is kind of what I ended up with, and I didn't like that, so I skipped that one. I believe this was the one I went with afterwards, and I used the Dremel with a round sanding wheel or something like that. Just kind of grind it out. And what I suggest you do is just kind of bore out the native hole that's here. Let me get one that's not bored out. So this is a stock canopy, and yes, they both fit, the 65X and the 75X. And so just kind of widen this and do a test fit on your lens of your Caddx and wind it out a bit more until it works, and then start to increase it up or down depending upon which way you want to go. And as you can see in mine, hopefully that comes through on camera. You can go up as high as you want to. I went up to what I think is pretty close to the stock camera mount. It's kind of flexing back down there on me a little bit, but you can go Matty stunts. You can go 60 degrees, I suppose, if you wanted to. We made sure, hopefully you can see that down in there, that there is enough space. You do have to be careful about soldering on the wires from the camera to the VTX, that you don't have big solder blobs. You want to keep that to a minimum, because that decreases your space between the VTX and the camera, and you do need that because the solder points are right underneath where the camera has to swivel, so be careful there. Also, you can buy these off of Amazon, and I've got a couple others I thought I'd show you. These are kind of fancy. I don't know why. I bought a bunch of them. These things do break quite a bit, and I think it was probably the blue one that caught my eye. Let me get this to focus. I think I saw the blue one in the image, and I thought I had to have that. So you can buy those. Robert is also working on a canopy that you can print yourself, and you can see my printer again. It kind of shut the poop there, right there. But he's working on another canopy. So if you wanted to print this in some sort of material, this is TPU, probably too thin. As far as this material goes, but if you have different material that might be a bit stiffer but yet pliable, this might work for you. And if he has that posted to Thingiverse, I'll include a link down below to that as well. One thing about this canopy, it seems really flexible, especially when you don't have it screwed down, but when you kind of secure the edges, it stiffens up a fair bit. Now remember, my top, it didn't fill in very well, but it does stiffen up quite a bit when you hold these edges down, the little flaps where we put our screws. And that should work out just fine if you want to print one of those up as well. So if I forget to link anything, please alert me to that. If you have any other questions or comments about this modification to enjoy your beta brushless quads a little bit more with a better camera, let me know in the section down below. I have gotten some questions about the 1200 TV line camera. They do have a mount for that right off the BetaFPV website, but unfortunately that mount's going to take some, I think what could be some fairly serious modification in order to work. It's not meant for this VTX that's pinned to the board. I think it's made for one of the brushed quads where you just have a flat surface there and you don't have a VTX that's pinned to the flight controller. So be cautious, especially if you're purchasing that from them. It's going to take some modification to work on the brushless whoops that BetaFPV is selling. Okay, again, if you have any questions, leave that in the section down below. I appreciate your time, and thanks for watching.